This is one of the most infamous crime scenes of all time, the home of JonBenét Ramsey. You've all seen this house on TV for 25 years. But how much do you actually know what happened inside this home on the night of December 25th, 1996? JonBenét's half-brother is here with the latest on the hunt for her killer. Will DNA finally reveal who committed this horrible crime? Plus, the people who have dedicated their lives to solving this cold case have new information that they want you to see. And I promise you, after today, you'll never look at the JonBenét Ramsey case the same way ever again.
Police! What's going on? What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
JonBenét Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty pageant queen forever etched in our minds as the haunting face of America's most baffling murder mystery. It's been almost 25 years since a rambling 3-page ransom note was found in the Ramseys' Colorado home the morning after Christmas of 1996. And then later, JonBenét's tiny, lifeless body discovered by her father in their basement. At first, authorities focused on her parents, Patsy and John, compounding the family's grief and heartache. Though the Ramseys maintained their innocence, it wasn't until 2008 that they were finally exonerated. 2 years after, Patsy lost her battle to ovarian cancer at the age of 49. Despite decades of extensive investigations and John Ramsey's continued efforts to search for answers, the 6-year-old's gruesome murder remains unsolved to this day. Do you believe the killer of your daughter JonBenét is still out there?
I do. I mean, he could be dead. I don't know. But, yeah, he's not been caught. And, you know, the real fear is that he's done this again. I don't know. But this is an evil, evil person.
Now, JonBenét's half-brother, John Andrew, carries the torch to find her killer. With continued DNA testing and a narrowing list of potential suspects, the family believes they're closer than ever to finding justice for JonBenét. JonBenét's half-brother, John Andrew Ramsey, joins us now exclusively. John Andrew, you were only 20 years old when your little sister was murdered. What do you remember most about JonBenét?
Yeah, you know, I think it's important to remember that JonBenét was a 6-year-old kindergartner with classmates and friends. She enjoyed playing with her older brother, Burke, and the neighborhood kids, and riding bikes around, and, you know, just a regular kid.
Yeah, everything seemed normal, but once this horrible murder occurred, there was a media storm that followed you and your family everywhere. The press, I understand, really made things quite bad. Can you describe a little bit of that to us?
Yeah, you know, for context, you know, in 1996, 97, 98, I mean, this was the height of tabloid media. You know, Princess Diana, of course, was killed around this time, in part because of the tabloid press. So they were vicious. You know, they hid in trees and bushes, dug through our garbage, followed us around town. You know, it was certainly a distraction and a circus that followed.
Sadly, JonBenét's mother, Patsy, your stepmom, passed away 2 years before your family was exonerated by the district attorney's office thanks to DNA evidence. So how hard has it been to see Patsy and your dad live under the cloud of suspicion for all those years?
Yeah, it's maddening, mostly because all of that time and resources and energy that was for naught. It was wasted. It should have been spent looking for the killer of JonBenét and investigating and following the facts of the case. But unfortunately, it was time wasted. I mean, it's the very reason we're here today, where we are, and that this killer has not been caught because of that time wasted.
And it continues, right? Despite the existence of DNA from a man not related to your family being found in 3 different places on JonBenét, in 2016, there was a theory presented that your half-brother, Burke, who was only 9 at the time, was somehow responsible for this. So, John Andrew, I mean, how hard was that for him and for the rest of the family?
Yeah, you know, Burke is a smart and kind person, and he's handled this incredible ordeal with an amazing amount of grace and poise. But speaking as his older brother and seeing what he's been through and hearing these shameless accusations that aren't based in truth or fact is hurtful. Yeah. The Boulder police themselves, the Boulder district attorney have said almost from day one that Burke is not a suspect and had nothing to do with this crime. Burke was a 9-year-old little boy, and it's just heartbreaking to see what he's been through.
When your dad was here on this show, I was very moved by what he said, that the reason he kept motivated to find the truth beyond just justice for JonBenét. Take a listen.
There was a time when I felt like you tell me who did this and we won't need a trial. I'll take care of it. But then I realized, well, that makes me a bad person too. That's not right. I'd like it to be brought to a conclusion for the sake of my grandchildren, for the sake of my children, so there's clarity in that for them.
John Andrew, your dad is in his late 70s now. What would it mean to him if JonBenét's killer was finally caught?
Yeah, it's a complex question in that by catching the killer, we're inviting additional trauma into our lives, right? We're going to have to live through a trial and the publicity and the storm that follows. But the family's dedicated to the truth and dedicated to getting justice for JonBenét. We will pursue this to the end of the earth to get to the truth and to find the killer.
All right, coming up, could modern DNA advances finally identify JonBenét's killer? Her half-brother, John Andrew, has the latest. I am back with JonBenét Ramsey's half-brother, John Andrew. There are people who have dedicated their lives helping your family find out what really happened to your sister. Do you believe in your heart that this cold case can finally be solved?
Absolutely. And I'm not a particularly optimistic person in life. I'm a data-driven guy. And when I look at this case, I see a mountain of evidence that we have. I see that we're in this golden age of forensic science, that we can apply new and advanced technologies to finally solve this case. So I'm very optimistic.
Well, speaking of golden, after the Golden State Killer was identified using genetic genealogy, I know your dad was very hopeful that the technique could be used to identify JonBenét's killer. I got to say, so was I. So has the DNA found on your sister been submitted for that type of testing yet?
No is the short answer. And when genealogy search was first pioneered, 3-4 years ago, the requirements were pretty steep. But 3 years down the line, those requirements are becoming less and less rigorous. We have labs like Othram down in Texas, who's doing amazing work with very degraded samples and mixtures and building out full genealogy profiles. And the second thing to consider too, Dr. Oz, is that genealogy search is certainly the holy grail and what we all want to strive for, but there's lots and lots of new technologies that will widen the net and allow us to leverage the DNA that was found on JonBenét's body to find the killer, right? Things like familial testing, problastic genotyping, and refining the profile should all be evaluated and used to find the killer.
My goodness, you've become an expert in this area, and not surprising.
Unfortunately.
So touch DNA is a concept that people have gotten familiar with. It's often referred to as trace DNA technology, and that's how authorities found evidence of a man not related to your family on JonBenét's leggings in 2008. You made the argument, which I completely understand, that the handle of the suitcase that was probably used in the murderer's escape should be tested the same way.
Right. So when this crime occurred in 1996, our understanding and our use of DNA was really early on in its infancy. And now here we are in 2021, and the way a crime scene is evaluated is much different. So we really need to think about where all did the killer interact with JonBenét, as well as the crime scene itself. So the suitcase is a prime example of one item. We know the killer interacted with that suitcase, and it should be tested. And there's many, many more items from the crime scene that should be tested by 2021 standards.
Well, as far as you know, all that said, has the Boulder Police Department had any of these more modern DNA tests done?
We've had limited to no updates from the Boulder Police Department, unfortunately. All I can go by is I have conversations with these private labs that are able to use the latest technologies, and they're not talking to the Boulder Police. So it's safe to assume the police are not doing anything.
But John Andrew, does that infuriate you that you've got technology racing ahead, but it doesn't seem like the Boulder Police Department's staying up with it? I get it. I mean, they got a bunch of other things they're dealing with that are current issues, but this is, I think, and I agree with you, a solvable crime if we use technology that we can use in other cases.
It's entirely maddening. And Dr. Oz, I wouldn't be here on your show if I had confidence in the police to do their job. Unfortunately, we've been put in a position of having to fight for justice for JonBenét. It's unfortunate. We can use technology. This case can be solved, and it should be solved.
Well, I'm glad you came here for that reason, because I have the same passion. Coming up, John Andrew reveals why he thinks JonBenét's killer may have been in his family's house weeks before her murder, and his message for the person responsible for this unthinkable crime. We're back with new updates on the investigation into JonBenét Ramsey's murder. Her half-brother, John Andrew, is with us today. The daughter of famed detective Lou Smith will be here in a minute, revealing new information about her list of suspects. Do you believe JonBenét's killer is on that list?
I think there's a very good likelihood the name is on that list. I think it's very plausible that somebody called in the days and the weeks following JonBenét's murder and gave that piece of information that we need, or that name that needs to be pursued.
So today we're going to be giving viewers a detailed look at the crime scene. I mean, really precisely understanding what went down so they can become part of the puzzle-solving team. Your dad bought the house in 1991, 5 years before this tragedy. What stands out to you about this house now?
Well, you know, it is a lovely house and a lot of good memories there. But I think it's important to people to consider that, you know, this was a 1920s Tudor home from the front, and then in the back was a massive addition, 3 stories. Originally, when we bought it, it had an elevator. And so this was a big, rambling house that had lots of rooms. The basement was cut up, lots of different rooms down in the basement. Yeah, it was a complicated house. Which I think explains some of the confusion and lost opportunity when not all of it was explored at the time of your sister's murder. John, yep. do you believe it's possible the killer was in your family's house weeks or at least days before JonBenét's murder? Yeah, I think it's totally plausible that this killer stalked our family, entered the home when we weren't there. Dad and Patsy, you know, traveled frequently. The house was, you know, not well secured. And, you know, I can speak firsthand and seeing pry marks in the rear door at one point prior to JonBenét's death when I was visiting the home. So this killer was probably obsessed with your family, maybe your sister. I think so. I think you can see that in the writings in the ransom note themselves, that this person was driven by fantasy. So what's your message to the person who murdered your half-sister? I'm sure they're following this case as carefully as you are. Yeah, we're coming for you. You know, you think you're smart, but you're not. We're coming. Well, I've got confidence in you, John Andrew, and the rest of your family. Good luck in everything you're doing. I'll do my best to support you as well. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Regards to your father. Thank you. We'll be right back.
There's a scream. The scream was heard by one of the neighbors 150 feet across the street from the Ramseys. She said it was the most terrifying child scream I've ever heard. Now, how could she hear it, but not the parents?
That was famed detective Lou Smith raising a critical question about the night JonBenét was killed. His unrelenting investigation of this case is featured in the Discovery Plus documentary, JonBenét Ramsey, What Really Happened. Another person who was dedicated to solving this murder is private investigator John St. Augustine, who joins us now. And John, before we talk about the scream, let's walk through this crime scene, because you've been intimately involved with this case. So where were JonBenét's parents' rooms on this model?
So on that model, Dr. Oz, would be the entire third floor. So right under your hand there would be the third floor. Right below that, the second floor would be where JonBenét Ramsey's room would be. In fact, that specific window right there, there was actually a patio that was there for JonBenét's room. Burke's room was also on the second floor on the opposite side of the house. And then you have the main level and then a basement level as well.
So this main level, if I understand correctly, is where the ransom note was found, right?
Correct. So as you actually where you're at right now, Dr. Oz, if you walk through that door that's right on front of you there, as you walk in, probably about 15, 20 feet, there's a spiral staircase. And it's on that spiral staircase that led to the second floor and to the third floor that you would have seen that ransom note. It would have been on that first floor on the stairs.
Right. That's that 3-page rambling note that was found in. And that again was, but before 6 a.m. that day, it was placed there. But it wasn't until hours later, after the police had been there for a long time, that JonBenét's body was discovered in this corner of the basement by her father. So you all see the layout now. Now, she had been brutally tortured, sexually assaulted, and ultimately murdered. John, how big a problem is it that the police did not find her down in this corner until so much later?
Well, I think that's why we are where we are right now with the case being unsolved, is that, law enforcement had the opportunity to search that entire home, failed to open one of the doors where she was behind. And actually, they made even a bigger mistake by having the father, Mr. Ramsey, go look for things out of the ordinary, at which point he then discovers his little girl.
I just cannot imagine what that was like. So you worked with Detective Lou Smith when he first came on the case. You got very intimate and understood these issues. What did he uncover about the scream heard by the neighbor 150 feet across the street? Remember, there's a street here, so the neighbor's house was over here. So there's a 150 feet distance here. How is it possible that this little girl whose body is here, and this is where she was left, she may have been murdered here as well. How is it possible that she was murdered, screamed, and that wasn't heard several floors up where her parents were, but rather by someone across the street?
Yeah, first we have to understand, right, that there's 3 floors above this particular basement.
Yeah.
And when the Ramseys did that expansion to the 3rd floor, there was actually some soundproofing that went into that addition, that remodeling. Now, when you look back at that model, Dr. Oz, just on the other side of that wall where her body was found, so if you just go on the other side of that, there's actually a furnace room or a boiler that's just on the other side of that room. Right above where you're pointing with that red stick is actually a pipe. And what happened is there was probably something that happened to JonBenét in this particular area, and as a result of that, she obviously had screamed because the neighbor across the street heard that scream, and the reason why she heard it and the Ramseys did not hear it is that that sound was amplified by that pipe, and it caused that sound to go across. So it's very plausible. It makes a lot of sense why the neighbor across the street was able to hear the scream and why the Ramseys were not.
So again, there's a ceiling here. This is all closed off. The noise that came from this poor little girl would have come through this door, into this room, up through this pipe, and be focused right across the street where someone would hear it. I get it completely now that you explain it. And it's this pipe that I think was missed by people early on. Now, for a long time, authorities focused on the theory that JonBenét's skull was cracked by a member of her family, possibly because she wet the bed. Right? And then the crime was staged to look like a botched kidnapping to make up for this error. So I want you to listen to the evidence Lou Smith uncovered that disputes that theory.
If JonBenét is killed over bedroom and then everything is staged to make it look like a kidnapping, then JonBenét would have been dead already. But above the ligature marks, fingernail marks, according to the coroner, this isn't our killer's fingernail marks. These are JonBenét's marks, alive, well aware of what's happening to her. She is struggling against her life.
Lou's daughter, Cindy Mara, has been dedicating her life to solving this case since her dad's tragic death in 2010. Cindy, thanks for being here, for your perseverance. Was there any sign of bedwetting in JonBenét's room?
My dad did not think that there was any signs of bedwetting in her room. He's got pictures that show her sheets, and they look dry. They don't look like they're urine stained. They look dry. And they further also look like they had been there for some time, so it's not like they were washed and then put back on the bed. In fact, fibers from JonBenét's clothing was found in the bed, which just indicated that they hadn't washed the clothes and then remade the bed.
So the evidence of urine on her body when she was discovered probably happened as she was being murdered? Is that the thought?
Yes. Well, I think that she probably urinated during the assault on her, and that's why her underwear had urine and they were wet, and why the bed was not.
All right, coming up, we're going to take you inside the Ramsey basement, revealing the key pieces of evidence that could finally solve JonBenét's murder. Today, we're taking you inside the JonBenét Ramsey crime scene to reveal the crucial evidence that could finally solve this 25-year-old cold case. Cindy Mara, daughter of famed detective Lou Smith, is with us. We're also joined now by Lou's former colleague, retired Sheriff John Anderson. They're leading the team that's vowed to continue Lou's hunt for the truth. Now, I want you all to take a closer look at the Ramsey basement. This is really important. I'm just going to orient you real quick. Here are the stairs coming from upstairs. Go down to the basement, right? And these are the stairs that were used to bring JonBenét down here. We'll talk about how that happened in a second. Over here is where the body was found, in the opposite corner of the basement. And here's this little boiler room that we discussed a second ago, right? So this is this part. However, I want to move over to here. This is a set of train tracks, plate train tracks that I'll talk about in a second. And if you go over to this corner of the basement, so the opposite side from where her body is, there's a window. And there's a suitcase, and there's a little scuff on the wall. You see that? Right now, this suitcase may have been used to climb out through this window. And I'm going to just explain what the story is here. Because there was a banging sound of metal hitting concrete that was heard by one of the people living in that neighborhood, which may have been a sound made by this grate being moved or placed back. So conceptually, the perpetrator may have come through this window, entered the house here, walked around, gone up those stairs, done all the damage, and perhaps come back, stepped on this suitcase, and escaped through this window, closing this grate behind them. So, John, you've worked in law enforcement for 40 years. How often does the intruder enter and exit a home in the same location?
Far and away the majority of cases. Whenever there's a burglary, the suspect's comfortable and knows the way that they entered the crime scene, the residence or business, and it's almost without exception their preferred method of exit.
And walk me through this whole argument about the lack of tracks in the snow. I've seen pictures of the front of the houses. There's about an inch of snow there. You would think you'd have steps in that snow.
All right, Dr. Oz, and this has been one of the misperceptions from the very beginning, and it's one thing that drove my former homicide partner, Lou Smith, crazy, is, people would just look at the front of the house, with the snow and the candy canes and all of that. But Lou said right from the beginning, when you go around the back of the house where that window was broken, it was clearly used to enter that home and could be used, so there was no snow. And the picture you're showing right now shows how the back of the house, where it was more sunny or whatever, there was no snow there to leave any fingerprint or leave any footprints.
Yeah, it makes sense now that I see this. Great. I'll come back to that in a second. Cindy, how could an intruder gotten into the house, gone up the stairs, gotten JonBenét from the second floor without waking her parents?
Well, my dad thought that he was first of all, that he had been there while the Ramseys were gone that evening. So he had plenty of time just to kind of look around and see where he wanted to hide. My dad's theory was that the intruder possibly was in the guest bedroom, and when everybody went to sleep, he went into JonBenét's room, and possibly even at that point stun gunned her. We don't know, but he was able to restrain her, and my dad believes then take her down into the basement in an attempt to get her out that window.
So let me just go back to this issue of whether a stun gun was used. Some have suggested that the marks on JonBenét's body, I'm going to show them to you now, were caused by the ends of the model train tracks found in the basement. They're over here. That I mentioned them very briefly before. They're sort of on the way anywhere you go in that basement. So, and it's true that train tracks do have little sharp edges on them. So, John, what have you uncovered about that possibility?
Our team's done some extensive analysis with the train tracks, and Lou did a lot of work on the stun gun. And what you'll be able to tell from the stun gun is it left two triangular shaped marks or wounds on the victim's body, what we're seeing here, both on her back and on the cheek. And what we've been able to determine is the distance between those burns is 3.5 centimeters, which is consistent with an O-gauge model train track. However, you can see from this photo, those train tracks are, the ends of them are circular. They couldn't leave a rectangular mark, and that's why we're confident that the train tracks were not used to leave these marks on the body.
In fact, those marks look almost rectangular, square, right? So they're more consistent with a stun gun because that's what the tip of a stun gun probe looks like. So once JonBenét was brought down to the basement, I'm going to go back down to this exit space. There's this suitcase, right, that's found by the window. It becomes even more significant. Yes, it's possible they may have stepped out of the house using that suitcase, but Sydney, what did your dad find in this suitcase?
There was a duvet and a sham that was found in the suitcase, and they found that there were fibers from the duvet and sham on JonBenét's body, on her shirt, on the front and back of her shirt, on her wrist ligatures, in her vaginal area, and in the body bag. So that led him to believe that JonBenét had been put in that suitcase possibly to get her out of that window, and that's how they were going to do it.
But that suitcase wouldn't fit through the window, which is intriguing because it's possible they were the kidnapper. It initially started as a kidnapping. We're trying to put the child in a suitcase, couldn't get the suitcase through the window. Something else happened, and if he failed in getting her outside the house, it might explain why he then took her over here to the storage room, right? From over there, back over here to the storage room, where she was tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered. And next to her body, authorities found a print from a high-tech branded boot right there. John, have authorities ever been able to determine who owned these boots?
No, they have not. And that was really important for Lou because none of the family had high-tech boots. So he believed that it's possible the suspect left that footprint next to the body.
And what about the packing peanuts, this little white thing you see here, and some leaves around there? How did they presumably get into this room? Because this is not a room that's exposed to the outside. Cindy?
That's my dad picked up on that because his thought as to how the intruder got in was through that window well that was 2 rooms away from where JonBenét's body was found. And there's just no way that they found what was appeared to be a packing peanut and also a leaf, a brown leaf. And those were consistent with what my dad found as disturbance in the window well that he thought the intruder entered into.
So it's a theory, but it is consistent. This well is pulled off. The intruder picks up some leaves and a white peanut from this window well. There's actually the area that's cleared out by that. Comes through here, has his tools and his escape device here, his suitcase. Has access to lots of other things in this basement. And so you begin to see how the puzzle pieces are coming together. So coming up, why what you don't see in this basement is just as important as what was found here, and how you can help solve this crime from your living room. Stay with us. We're back bringing you the latest on JonBenét Ramsey's unsolved murder. Now, just as important as everything we have shown you in this basement, right, is what wasn't found at the scene. Because there was no stun gun. There was no high-tech branded boots, as a track of which was discovered next to her body. There was no duct tape that was used, that could match what was used on JonBenét's mouth. And most chillingly, a broken piece of a paintbrush was never found. John, explain why that paintbrush clue is so significant.
Lou thought that was critical because the garrote was fashioned at the site where the crime occurred. And the paintbrush was broken into 3 pieces. One piece used to fashion the garrote. Another piece was at the scene, possibly used in the sexual assault of the child. But that third piece was missing. And what we know from criminal investigations is that a suspect often will leave something at the scene or take something with them. And they may have taken that paintbrush. Of course, they could get rid of it, but the DNA will remain the same.
So again, the garrote was probably the murder weapon, right? They put the rope around the piece of the paintbrush, and they had two other pieces that you're pointing out, which should be a big clue. And there was also someone touched that garrote. Someone touched this child. And well before his death in 2010, Detective Lou Smith was sure that DNA would be the key to solving JonBenét's murder. So take a listen.
The killer left behind, I believe, part of his DNA. From the crotch of the victim's panties, 2 spots of blood containing a mixture of DNA. The victim being one source and the other a male.
So far, authorities have found male DNA that does not match any member of the Ramsey family in 3 places. Under JonBenét's fingernails, right there, you see her hands laid up, on her underwear, and on the long john leggings that she wore that night. So, Cindy, your father left behind a meticulously organized document of the most important information from his investigation, including a report on the unidentified male's DNA. Now, I'm sure a lot of people watching are wondering why we just can't submit that for genetic genealogy test and just do it yourself. But it's not that simple, I understand.
It's not. I mean, we would be all over that if we could do it. But that requires actual DNA. So the method that they test DNA under for genealogy purposes is different than the way it was tested under the long john. So one is called STR testing and the other is called SNP testing. So we would actually have to have actual DNA in order to submit it for the SNP testing that would be necessary to do the genealogy research.
Cindy's team, I should point out, has a GoFundMe page where they raise money to fund their continued search for justice because it is expensive. And they tell us that they've offered to use that money to pay for any new DNA testing that the Boulder Police Department needs help to get done. John, it's a very generous offer. You're an experienced member of the force. What was their response?
They said nothing. They didn't accept our offer. We offered to pay for any DNA testing, and so far that's not happened.
So we actually reached out ourselves to the Boulder Police Department for comment. Here's what we were told in part. Because this is an open and active homicide investigation, we are unable to answer your questions without potentially compromising the integrity of the investigation. When there is new information to share with our community, we will do so. We're going to have their full response to DrOz.com. Cindy's dad left behind a list of suspects that he felt very strongly about, that he felt the killer must be on that list. Her family's team has been researching hard, going through every name on that list. So, Cindy, what's the latest on your hunt for the truth?
Well, we've just continued to try and collect DNA and test DNA, but he left us so much information, one of which was the spreadsheet. That was the most helpful information for us, along with a PowerPoint presentation that he left that has all of the evidence that he found in this case. But the spreadsheet contains the names of people and items that he ran across in the case file that he thought was important to the case. So they are all listed. There's a list of them. He's got them in tiers. And since he died, we've just been trying to collect DNA from those people and just basically eliminate them from our spreadsheet. And so we have had success. We have not had a match, but we've been able to eliminate some people from that list. So now we have about 10 people that are off the list because of DNA testing.
Cindy, what does it cost to do that testing?
Well, it depends on what kind of DNA we're submitting. If it is like a buccal swab where they swab their own mouths, it costs about $800 to $1,000. And then it just goes up from there, depending on what the nature of what we've collected, that they can test, a straw or a cup or whatever it may be. And then we've kind of just factored in, and this is just a rough estimate, but probably around $4,000 to $5,000 per person once we do the investigation to try and find these people and get it tested.
Well, it's a drop in the bucket of what's been expended to try to solve this case. The 25th anniversary of this tragic cold case is going to be this Christmas. Cindy, could JonBenét's killer finally be identified this year?
I think so. I think with the how far we've come with DNA technology, there's really no reason that this case can't be solved. My dad said all along that DNA was going to solve this case. And I think that we're in a position now where that can be done. It just takes the effort and the heart of the Boulder Police Department to do that.
And John, why do you think the Boulder Police Department has seemed reluctant to engage?
I can't speak for the Boulder DA. This is not how we would have run the investigation. One thing that Lou brought is experience with over 200 cases. And right before he was brought on to the Boulder DA District Attorney's Office investigative team, I spoke to the then District Attorney, Alex Hunter, and I shared with him how Lou had solved a 4-year-old cold case of a 13-year-old little girl who had been abducted in our community by the name of Heather Dawn Church. Very similar circumstances, forced entry that was dismissed, a fingerprint left at the crime scene. Lou had that case solved within 3.5 months after I was elected sheriff of El Paso County, and Lou came in and took over that case. And what I told the district attorney was follow what Lou is telling you, follow where the evidence takes you, support Lou and get behind this. And had they done that, I think this case would have been solved 24 years ago.
And was it Eagle that prevented them from trusting an outsider?
That's probably part of it. I think, unfortunately, in investigations, and this is from experience being in that case, people in the investigative law enforcement capacity, maybe everybody, you're looking for consensus, and when you have somebody who stands out and is pointing out something different where you're not getting the consensus, and that's what Lou was doing. But he was doing it from a factual basis. He was doing it from a basis of experience and having seen 200 homicide cases. And I think he was ostracized for not going with the flow. It was really a tragic situation. And unless somebody comes in and objectively, takes that case over, who has experience and is willing to exploit that DNA, I'm not sure it'll ever be solved.
Well, let's make this show a call to action. I really am, and I see all the compelling arguments you guys are making. It's for the viewers, I'm sure they're looking at this and saying, guys, wake up. It's right there in front of you. But I've worked in large organizations. I think, John, you got your finger on the pulse. I think sometimes you ignore good advice because you're never a prophet in your own land. Anyway, John, thank you very much. Cindy, God bless your father for doing all this work and getting this set up for you and the rest of your team. This link on your screen is for the GoFundMe page I've been talking about. It's going to help pay for those DNA tests that Cindy's family is using to find JonBenét's killer. Please support their important work. We're also going to have it on DrOz.com. The Discovery Plus documentary, which is fantastic, is called JonBenét Ramsey, What Really Happened. It's streaming now. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.